The desert was silent. Not the kind of silence that soothes, but the kind that warns. The kind that holds its breath before something breaks. Staff Sergeant Jack Reilly stood alone under the scorching Afghan sun, dust clinging to his uniform like a second skin. His rifle was slung across his chest, but it wasn't the weight of the weapon that pressed on him. It was the absence of voices, the quiet after a firefight, the echo of names that would never be answered again. At his side, a German shepherd stood motionless, eyes locked on the horizon. His fur was black and gray, dusty but proud, his stance alert. The name on his collar tag shimmered in the light. Rex. Jack reached down, resting a gloved hand on Rex's head. "You with me?" he asked softly. Rex didn't bark. He didn't move. But his eyes, those deep amber eyes, never wavered. They had lost men today, a convoy ambush, an explosion that changed everything, and yet somehow, against all odds, it was Jack and Rex who came out alive. This wasn't just war anymore. It was survival. And somewhere between the violence and the silence, between bloodshed and loyalty, something unspoken had passed between soldier and dog. A bond deeper than command, more enduring than orders. The kind of bond you don't read about in reports, but that lives and dies on the battlefield. What follows is not just a story about war. It's a story about brotherhood, about loss, healing, and the dog that refused to leave a soldier behind, even after the war was over. Because sometimes heroes don't carry rifles. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs. Staff Sergeant Jack Reilly wasn't the kind of man who shared stories easily. 36 years old, quiet, sharp-jawed, with eyes the color of smoke after rain. He had served 12 years in the British Army, 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. He wasn't reckless, but he was relentless. A man who followed orders, but only after thinking 3 steps ahead. Before the military, Jack had been a carpenter's apprentice in Yorkshire, a life of wood and nails. But after his younger brother died in a drunk driving accident, Jack behind the wheel, he traded blueprints for battlefield maps. He didn't talk about the guilt. He didn't need to. It lived behind his eyes. When Jack volunteered for the K9 unit, it wasn't out of curiosity. It was out of necessity. He had already tried every coping method the Army had offered. Counseling, distance running, silence. Nothing stuck. But dogs? Dogs didn't ask questions. They didn't need explanations. They just were. That's when he met Rex, a 4-year-old German shepherd, born into service, trained in detection, but considered too difficult for most handlers. High drive, hyper-aware, loyal to a fault. Rex had been rotated through 3 different soldiers in less than a year. Each one quit. Then came Jack. Their first meeting wasn't emotional. Jack walked into the training yard. Rex sized him up like prey, and they simply stared at each other. But something passed between them. Not affection. Recognition. Rex had scars. Long, faded lines beneath the fur near his ribs. Jack noticed them, but didn't ask. Instead, he crouched and whispered, "Looks like we're both a bit broken." Rex tilted his head. By the end of that week, they moved together like one. During training, Jack stopped using standard commands. He spoke to Rex in low, calm tones. Rex responded not just to words, but tone, intention. He didn't just listen, he watched. By the time they deployed to Helmand Province, they were inseparable. They shared a cot in the barracks, ate together, ran drills together. On night patrol, Jack would feel Rex's breath just behind his boot steps, steady as a metronome. To most, Rex was a working dog. To Jack, he was a partner, the only one who didn't flinch when Jack's nightmares woke him screaming. The only one who could calm the tremble in his hands after defusing an IED. The only one who stayed when others quietly stepped away. And though Jack would never admit it, not even to himself, Rex reminded him what it felt like to be needed, to be trusted without question, to be loved without words. Out in the endless dust of Helmand, routine was survival. Jack and Rex began each day the same. 04:30 wake-up, followed by 2 laps around the perimeter. No one else was required to run that early. But they did. Together. It wasn't about fitness. It was about readiness. Focus. By sunrise, the camp would buzz with movement. Soldiers suiting up, radios crackling, orders echoing through sandbag corridors. But Jack and Rex moved like ghosts. Quiet. Controlled. They were the unit's go-to for explosive detection. Each day they swept roads, bridges, and abandoned buildings before convoys rolled out. Rex's nose was legendary, able to pick up trace elements of plastic or metal buried beneath rock and rubble. Sometimes his ears would twitch at something no one else heard. Jack learned to trust that twitch more than his own instincts. "Good boy," he'd say, brushing dust from Rex's coat. "You keep us breathing." Between missions, their world shrank to a cot, a water bowl, a tin plate of rations. But there was peace in the simplicity. Jack began to read again, mostly dog training manuals and worn novels traded between soldiers. Sometimes he read aloud, and Rex would lay his head on Jack's boot like a child listening to a bedtime story. Other soldiers respected them, but from a distance. "Don't mess with Reilly's mutt," someone joked once. "They finish each other's sentences." But there was admiration behind the laughter, because Jack and Rex had a rhythm, a trust that couldn't be taught, a bond built on long nights, close calls, and moments that changed lives in seconds. Like that time on patrol when Rex stopped dead in his tracks. No bark, no growl, just a hard stare into the field. Jack ordered everyone to freeze. Minutes later, an IED was found buried 2 feet from the sergeant's boot. That single pause saved 6 men. Afterward, one of the privates asked, "How'd he know?" Jack didn't answer. He just knelt beside Rex, scratched behind his ears, and whispered, "You just do, don't you?" And Rex, tail flicking once, blinked slowly. Calm, ready. But war doesn't respect routine, and calm never lasts. It happened on a Thursday. The air was still, the kind of stillness that sets a soldier's teeth on edge. Jack's unit had been assigned to escort a humanitarian convoy. 3 trucks carrying medical supplies, food rations, and water filters for a remote village near Lashkar Gah. Intel reported the area as low risk, but Jack knew better. The words low risk had preceded more funerals than he cared to count. Rex sat at the rear of the lead truck, eyes scanning the tree line. Jack stood beside him, chewing the inside of his cheek. Then it came. A sharp whine. Not a bark, not panic, just a whine. Short, focused, urgent. Jack's heart dropped. "Everyone hold position," he barked into the radio. "Something's off." The convoy halted. Dust swirled. Rex circled the front tires, nose low, ears flattened. Then he stopped, paw raised. Jack followed his gaze. There, beneath a scrap of canvas by the roadside, barely visible, a pressure plate wired to an anti-tank mine. They had been seconds from annihilation. Jack radioed in the bomb squad, heart pounding, but the ambush didn't wait. A deafening crack split the air. Gunfire. Then another explosion, this one behind them. Smoke, screams, chaos. It was a coordinated trap. Jack's instincts kicked in. He grabbed Rex's collar and dove behind the second vehicle as shrapnel tore through the air. Bullets pinged off metal. Soldiers yelled over radios. Someone cried out. A medic hit in the shoulder. Amid the firestorm, Rex stayed perfectly still, eyes focused, waiting. When the gunfire finally slowed and the last echo faded into the hills, 6 men were dead, 2 more wounded. Jack staggered from cover, blood trickling down his arm, uniform scorched. He looked down. Rex had a gash along his flank, deep, but not fatal. He stood upright, unmoving, tail low, but it was his eyes that shattered Jack. There was no fear, no pain, only a question. What now? The medevac arrived in waves. Bodies were bagged, survivors lifted into helicopters. Jack and Rex were airlifted last. In the cargo bay, Jack sat cross-legged beside his dog, wrapping Rex's side with a pressure bandage. "You did everything right," he whispered. "You saved us." Rex nudged Jack's knee with his snout, but Jack didn't speak again, because for the first time in years, he felt powerless. He had trained for loss, prepared for war, but nothing prepares you for watching your team die while your dog silently bleeds beside you. That day marked the end of the war for Jack. Even though the fighting wasn't over, even though he wasn't done, something inside him had already started walking off the battlefield. They were both patched up, but not healed. Jack spent 9 days in the field hospital. His injuries were minor: a torn muscle, bruised ribs, a laceration on his arm that required 12 stitches. Rex fared worse. The shrapnel had missed his lungs by inches. The vet wrapped his torso in gauze and muttered something about miracles before giving Jack a clipboard to sign. But physical wounds were the easy part. It was the silence between them that changed. Rex no longer slept through the night. He'd jolt awake, panting, pacing circles in their tent. Sometimes he'd bark into the darkness, as if chasing shadows only he could see. Jack understood, because he was doing the same. He stopped reading, stopped talking. His hands trembled when he tried to pour water. He refused to talk to the chaplain, refused to accept a reassignment. He wanted one thing and one thing only: to be discharged. He was done. His commanding officer resisted at first. "You're a decorated handler, Reilly. Stay. Train others. You and that dog are a legend." Jack didn't flinch. "I didn't come here to be a story. I came here to serve. I've served." And just like that, the paperwork began. But there was one problem. Rex was military property. All Jack's medals, all his field records, every life he'd saved, none of it mattered. Rex was assigned to another handler the moment Jack's discharge was approved. Just another transfer in a long line of transfers. Jack protested. He wrote letters, made calls. "You can't just separate us," he said to the base director. "That dog's not a machine. He's not gear. He didn't finish the sentence, because he didn't know how to explain that Rex was the only thing that had kept him alive. Rex didn't eat when Jack packed up his things. He sat by the cot, unmoving, not barking, not whining, just watching. When the day came for Jack to board the plane home, Rex was led away by a new handler. The dog didn't look back, and that broke Jack more than anything else. Back in the UK, the world felt unreal. Shiny buildings, quiet streets, people laughing over coffee. Jack moved into a small flat in Leeds, furnished with only a mattress, a kettle, and a single photograph. Him and Rex after their first mission, both covered in dust, both alive. He tried to settle into civilian life, took odd jobs, avoided crowds, started and quickly quit group therapy. Nothing worked. He woke up sweating, dreamt of Rex barking from behind a locked gate, dreamt of gunfire, dreamt of being too late. One day he went back to the army base, just to ask, just to see. They told him Rex had been rotated again. New handler, new region. "Still active?" Jack asked. The officer shrugged. "Last we heard, yes." But Jack knew that couldn't last. Rex was showing signs of trauma before he left. That kind of dog. You can't just plug into another soldier and expect the same result. He needed stability. He needed home. Jack left that day with a mission. He was going to find Rex. Whatever it took. It began with a woman named Dr. Sarah Langley, a former military psychologist turned civilian trauma counselor. Sarah had worked with dozens of discharged soldiers struggling to adapt, but she had a particular interest in canine units and a reputation for bridging the invisible space between man and dog. Jack met her by accident, literally. He was sitting in the back of a community center during a PTSD seminar, arms crossed, eyes distant, when Sarah stepped off the stage during break and handed him a cup of tea. "You've been listening," she said. "I've been sitting," Jack replied. She smiled. "Fair enough, but not just sitting. You haven't blinked since I mentioned service dogs." Jack didn't respond, so she sat beside him. For the next 20 minutes, she didn't offer therapy, didn't prod, didn't ask about trauma. She just talked about dogs, how they bond, how they grieve, how they remember. "You know they dream, right?" she said. "Their brains replay things, just like ours, especially the ones that have seen combat. That caught his attention. Rex paces in his sleep. Sarah nodded. He's still on the battlefield, just like you. From that moment, Jack opened up. He told her everything, not just the firefight, not just the IED, but Rex, the early mornings, the books, the quiet understanding, the way they breathed in sync. Sarah didn't judge. Instead, she offered a path. "There's a loophole in your discharge clause," she said, pulling up a file. Clause 16B. If a handler can prove exceptional bond and therapeutic necessity, they can petition to adopt a retired K-9 early. Jack blinked. Retired? He's close, Sarah said. He's showing signs. You said it yourself. Night terrors, loss of appetite, withdrawal. Eventually, they'll deem him unfit for service. You just need to prove you're the right place for him to go. Jack sat back, heart racing. You're saying I could get him back? Sarah nodded. But it won't be easy. You'll need paperwork, medical evaluations, letters of support, a hearing. Jack didn't hesitate. I'll do it. That night, he pulled out the photo again, the one of him and Rex, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like a ghost staring at a memory. He felt like a soldier with a mission. Over the next few weeks, Jack transformed. He got a part-time job at a local dog shelter, walking rescues, cleaning kennels, learning behavior patterns. He signed up for a trauma therapy group just to prove he was actively in recovery. He called every former commander, teammate, medic, anyone who had served with him and Rex. Every letter of recommendation, every psychological review, every military report became a brick in the wall he was building between them and no. Sarah helped him prepare the case. She even arranged for him to speak at a veterans hearing where former handlers could appeal for early adoption rights. You'll need to tell your story, she said. Jack hesitated. I don't tell stories. Sarah leaned in. You don't have to. Just tell the truth. And so, for the first time since returning home, Jack stood in front of a room of strangers and said, He didn't just save my life in the field. He saved it when the world went quiet. He's not my dog. He's my brother. The room was silent when he finished, but not for long, because something had shifted. Jack was no longer a man trying to escape the war. He was a man trying to bring someone home from it. It all came down to one envelope. After months of petitions, hearings, letters, interviews, and restless nights, Jack found himself standing in his flat's narrow hallway, a white envelope in one hand, fingers trembling like he was back on patrol with a live wire in his grip. He didn't sit down. He didn't breathe. He just opened it. Your petition for early retirement and private adoption of military working dog Rex 2231 has been approved. His knees nearly gave out. He dropped to the floor. He laughed. And then he cried, loud, messy, years in the making sobs. Rex was coming home. The shelter assigned for the transfer was a private facility just outside London. It wasn't army-operated anymore, just a quiet retirement center for military canines, staffed by former handlers and volunteers. Jack arrived early. The wind was cold, the sky gray. His boots clicked on the concrete like they used to on base, but his heart beat faster than it ever had in uniform. A volunteer met him at the gate. He's been quieter than most, doesn't really engage, refuses toys, but when we showed him your photo, she trailed off. He cried. Jack nodded, unable to speak, and then the kennel gate opened. Rex stepped out slowly, his gait a little stiffer, fur grayer at the muzzle, but those amber eyes. Still fire, still focus, still him. He paused. He stared. And then he ran. Not like a pet, not like a dog coming to his master, but like a soldier rushing to his brother. Jack dropped to his knees. Rex slammed into his chest, whining, licking, collapsing into his arms like the weight of the last 2 years had finally broken off both their shoulders. Jack buried his face in Rex's fur. "You found me," he whispered. Rex nuzzled closer, and in that moment, the battlefield, the hospitals, the silence, the weight, all of it melted, because they were home, together. But the climax didn't end there. The army called Jack the following week with a proposal. Would he and Rex be willing to speak at a national event? Heroes of the Forgotten Front, a televised memorial dedicated to military working animals and their handlers? Jack hesitated, but only for a moment. Rex sat beside him, gaze steady. Jack smiled. "Yeah, we'll come." At the ceremony, Jack stood in full dress uniform, Rex in a custom-made service vest with his insignia and years of duty stitched in gold. When Jack took the microphone, he didn't deliver a speech. He told a story. This dog didn't just save lives on the field. He saved me when no one else could. And I think maybe I saved him too. The audience rose in applause. Some wept. And Rex? He stood tall beside his handler, chest lifted, as if he knew. This was not just a reunion. This was a recognition of love, of loyalty, of sacrifice. After the ceremony, life didn't return to normal, because there was no such thing anymore. There was only new. Jack and Rex moved into a small cottage on the outskirts of the Yorkshire Dales. Quiet hills, low stone walls, and a fireplace that crackled like old radio static. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Jack built Rex a bed out of reclaimed wood, lined it with thick wool blankets, and placed it right next to the window. But as always, Rex chose the floor by Jack's bedside instead. Old habits, new peace. Each morning, Jack brewed 2 cups of tea, one for himself and a bowl of warm broth for Rex. They'd sit on the porch together, watching the mist rise from the hills, neither needing to speak. Sometimes Jack would read aloud again, not manuals this time, but novels, memoirs, poems. One day, while flipping through a worn poetry collection, he read a line and went still. What you save saves you in return. He looked at Rex, and Rex looked back. Yes, exactly that. Over time, Jack began volunteering with a local veteran outreach group. He brought Rex with him, and at first no one said much, just nods, glances, quiet acknowledgement. Then one man asked, "Is that the Rex from Helmand?" Jack smiled. Word had spread. Rex became a living legend, gentle with children, calm with the anxious, solid under pressure, not because he was trained to be, but because he had lived through what they had. And somehow he still stood tall. One day, Jack found himself in front of a small group of young veterans, all newly returned, all hollow-eyed. He wasn't supposed to speak, but something tugged at him. He placed his hand on Rex's back and said, "I don't know how to tell you it gets better. I only know he stayed when I didn't want to, and because of that, I'm still here." A silence settled in the room, not the uncomfortable kind, the sacred kind. Afterward, one of the vets approached him in tears and whispered, "You gave me something to hold on to." Jack didn't respond. He just let Rex lean into the man's leg. That was enough. Back at the cottage, the seasons began to turn. The trees bloomed, shed, and bloomed again. Jack chopped firewood. Rex chased rabbits, slowly now, but joyfully. Some nights, Jack still woke up sweating. But he wasn't alone. A cold nose would nudge his hand. A quiet shape would curl closer. A breath would steady his own. The war had taken many things from them both. But in each other they had found something stronger than memory. They had found healing. By the time spring returned, Jack had stopped counting days. There was a rhythm now, not like the rigid structure of a base, but something gentler, earthy, honest. He spent mornings walking Rex through the valley trails, stopping to let him sniff wildflowers or watch the sheep in silence. They no longer moved like soldiers, ready, reactive. They moved like two old souls who had nothing left to prove. Locals began to recognize them. "Morning, Jack. Morning, Rex. Same route today? Looks like your boy found a fox trail again." Rex had become something of a town mascot. At the farmer's market, vendors left scraps for him in brown paper bags. At the cafe, someone always saved a quiet table out front. Children would run up with cautious curiosity, and Rex would sit like a statue, allowing small hands to pat his head with reverence. One afternoon, Jack was invited to speak at a local school for Remembrance Day. He hesitated. Again. Public speaking still knotted his stomach, but Rex would be there. So he said yes. He stood before 25 children in red sweaters and wide eyes and told them the story. Not of war, not of explosions, not of death, but of loyalty. Rex isn't just brave. He's constant. He doesn't need medals. He just needs someone who stays. The children clapped. Some cried. Later a teacher asked, "Do you ever wish he were just a normal pet?" Jack laughed softly. "He's not mine," he said. "I'm his." At home, Jack kept a scrapbook on his desk. Photos of the unit, letters from commanders, newspaper clippings, and in the center, One worn photograph, Jack and Rex, side by side, both looking into the camera after that first rescue mission, covered in dust, smiling without smiling. Jack added one more picture to the page. Rex lying under a blooming cherry tree, sunlight on his fur, eyes closed finally, at peace. And beneath it he wrote, "We made it back." Jack Reilly was no longer a soldier. He still woke early, still made tea in silence, still tied his boots the same way he did in the desert. But he didn't flinch at sudden noises anymore, didn't grip the edge of his chair during quiet moments, didn't feel like a ghost walking through his own life. He had been rebuilt, not by therapy alone, not by time, but by connection. Through Rex, Jack had learned that healing wasn't a line. It was a spiral. Some days brought peace, others brought echoes. But with each loop, he came back stronger, calmer, present. The man who once spoke in half sentences now led group talks for veterans. Not because he had all the answers, but because he finally believed in listening, in showing up, in being honest when someone asked, "How are you really?" He had learned to say, "Not perfect, but here." And that was enough. Rex aged gracefully. His muzzle turned silver, his steps slower, his naps longer. But his eyes, those ever-watchful amber eyes, never dulled. Even in rest he was aware. Even in sleep he was near. One evening, Jack sat by the fireplace, Rex curled beside him, a storm thudding gently against the windows. The room was warm, still. He looked at Rex and said, "You were the only thing that never changed. And because of that, I got to." Rex thumped his tail once against the floor as if to say, "Good." They didn't need words. They never did. Later that spring, Jack planted a garden behind the cottage. Lavender, rosemary, and forget-me-nots. He built a wooden bench overlooking the field, and beside it, a small stone marker with the words, "Loyalty saved us both." And beneath that, carved in Jack's own hand, Rex, soldier, brother, home. Because that's what transformation is. Not becoming someone else, but finally becoming yourself. Not all wars are fought with bullets. Some are fought in silence, in waiting rooms, in nightmares, in the space between a memory and a heartbeat. And not all heroes wear uniforms. Some have 4 legs, a scar across their ribs, and a gaze that sees right through you. Jack and Rex's story isn't just about survival. It's about returning. Returning to a life that doesn't make sense anymore. To a world that moves too fast. To a self you thought you'd lost. It's about what happens when you're no longer needed by the mission, but you're still needed by someone. It's about how love, real love, doesn't always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it waits quietly at the door, lays beside you through the darkest nights, and stays, no matter how broken you are, because loyalty doesn't ask questions. It doesn't need reasons. It just is. And when someone or something chooses to stay, even when they could leave, that's not just loyalty, that's home. So if you've ever felt lost, if you've ever carried a weight no one else could see, and if you've ever been saved, not by a cure, but by companionship, then maybe, just maybe, this story was meant for you. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever been saved by loyalty, by a bond that didn't need words, then help us share it. Like the video. Share it with someone who needs hope. Subscribe for more true stories of courage, healing, and unconditional love. And if you've ever had a Rex in your life, tell us in the comments. Because sometimes a story isn't just told, it's passed on. Thank you for watching, and remember, some heroes fight beside you, others simply never leave your side.